The night Conrad Sterling, Duke of Ravenscroft, drew his pen through Susannah Bryce's name on the household register, he did not look up from his correspondence. His steward, Parkins, had presented the register with the brisk efficiency of a man who had learned over 17 years that the Duke preferred decisions delivered on paper rather than in conversation. Conrad had reached for the pen, scanned the column of names, and struck the last one through. "We have enough women in service," he said. "Cross her out." Parkins took the register without comment. He had managed Dunrath Hall for 11 years under the previous Earl and 3 under the Duke, and he had learned in both arrangements to notice things he did not mention. He noticed, for instance, that Conrad had struck every other name on the register with a single efficient stroke. Susannah Bryce's name had 2. Susannah received the rejection on a Wednesday morning, tucked inside a brief note from the Dunrath Hall housekeeper, Mrs. Paget, who had written 3 careful lines explaining that the companion position had been filled and wishing her well. The handwriting was deliberate, slightly too neat, the handwriting of a woman softening something she had not been permitted to soften properly. Susannah read the note at the narrow table of her rented rooms in Edinburgh's New Town, in a building that smelled of damp wool and the particular quiet that settles on respectable poverty. She had taken the rooms 6 months ago, when the last of her father's pension arrangements had been resolved meaning exhausted, and she had accepted that the comfortable ambiguity of her situation was no longer comfortable or ambiguous. She was the daughter of the late Angus Bryce, 7th Earl of Dunrath, who had died 2 winters ago and left behind him a title that had descended to a distant cousin she had never met, an estate sold to cover debts the Earl had spent a lifetime refusing to acknowledge, and a daughter who had been present at the solicitor's office for all of it, saying nothing, signing what she was asked to sign, and walking home alone through the rain. She had wanted one thing back, not the house, not the title, not the accumulated weight of what her family had been. She had wanted a single document, a letter her father had written to his solicitor 2 months before his death, outlining an alternative disposition of Dunrath Hall that had never been presented to the courts because the solicitor had died before it could be filed. Susannah had known the document existed. She had helped her father draft it at the kitchen table one November afternoon when the light was going, and he had wanted her company more than her assistance. That letter was still somewhere in Dunrath Hall. She was almost certain of it, which was why she had applied for the companion position, and why someone had struck her name out without reading her file. The second letter arrived on Thursday, delivered by hand in the late afternoon by a man she did not recognize, in an envelope of a quality she had not seen in 2 years. Inside was a card, no signature, 7 words in an unhurried script. "Come to dinner. I believe we are acquainted." She knew the hand. She had seen it once, on a document her father had signed in the last year of his life, a private agreement she had never spoken of to anyone. Mr. Callum Ogilvy, solicitor, one of the few men in Edinburgh who had known her father as a friend rather than a client. Susannah set the card down. She looked at the window. Outside, Edinburgh went about its evening with its characteristic indifference to individual difficulty. She thought about Dunrath Hall, about the kitchen table, about her father's handwriting on a page that might still be folded inside the escritoire in the East study. If no one had moved it, if no one had thought to look. She picked up her pen and wrote 3 words on the back of the card. What time, then? Mr. Ogilvy was not what people expected when they heard the word solicitor. He was slight, quick-eyed, and possessed of the particular kind of stillness that belonged to men who had spent decades listening to other people explain themselves. He received Susannah in his study overlooking Charlotte Square, poured her tea, without asking whether she wanted it, and told her, without preamble, that he had acquired a copy of the document she was looking for. She had not told him she was looking for it. She had not told anyone. He watched her absorb this with the patience of a man who had anticipated the reaction. "Your father gave me a copy 7 years ago," he said, "as insurance. He was a careful man when he chose to be." "Not careful enough," Susannah said, because it was true and she had earned the right to say it. Ogilvy conceded this with a small inclination of his head. "The copy establishes that Dunrath Hall was to be held in trust for you. Not transferred, not sold. The arrangement the courts approved was based on an incomplete accounting of your father's intentions." He paused. "It does not guarantee you the estate, but it raises a question the current owner would prefer not to have raised before a judge." Susannah was quiet for a moment. She thought about Conrad Sterling, whom she had never met, who had bought Dunrath Hall at auction and installed himself and his household there for 2 seasons, and apparently employed people with admirable thoroughness, striking names from registers without reading the files attached to them. "He struck my name from his household register," she said. "I know," Ogilvy said. "I arranged for your application to be submitted." He said it without apology, in the tone of a man explaining one step in a longer process. "I wanted to know whether he had been told who you were." And had he? He had not. Ogilvy looked at her steadily. "He struck your name because his intended suggested the position had been filled. She was incorrect. It had not." He set down his cup. "Lady Sabrina Holm. She has been managing the household arrangements rather thoroughly since the autumn." Susannah considered this. She thought about a woman she had never met making decisions about a house that had once been hers, crossing names from registers, filling positions that were and were not filled. And she felt something colder than anger settle in her chest, something that had no name in polite society because polite society did not allow women in her position to feel it openly. "You want me to go there," she said. "I want you to come with me to a dinner at Dunrath Hall next Friday," Ogilvy said. "The Duke hosts a small gathering at the end of each month. I attend as his financial advisor. I am permitted a guest." He looked at her with the measured steadiness of someone placing a card on a table after a long game of holding it. "I thought it might be useful for you to walk through your father's front door on your own terms, rather than through the servant's entrance on someone else's." Susannah looked at the fire. She thought about 2 years of reduced rooms and careful economies, and the particular weight of being the daughter of an earl in a city where that meant nothing without the resources to sustain it. She thought about the East Study, the escritoire, the document her father had not quite managed to protect. She thought about the name struck through on a register in a house she had known since she was 4 years old. "I'll need a carriage," she said. "It will be arranged," said Ogilvy. Dunrath Hall sat 12 miles east of Edinburgh, at the edge of land that had belonged to the Bryce family for 6 generations. Susannah had not seen it in 27 months. She had made a deliberate point of not seeing it, had taken routes that avoided the glen, had declined 2 invitations that would have brought her near enough to glimpse the roofline from the road. She allowed herself to look at it now, through the carriage window, as the drive curved and the house came into frame through bare winter trees. It was lit from within, every window warm, the kind of light that announced money being spent without hesitation. The same stone, the same proportions, the same copper weather vane her grandfather had installed, listing 11 degrees to the east since before her father was born. But the garden had been replanted, formal where it had once been wild. The ivy trimmed from the east wing. Ogilvy said nothing. He had the sensitivity of a man who understood that some silences required company and not commentary. They went in through the front door. The entrance hall smelled the same. Stone and beeswax and the particular cold of that corridor when the wind came from the north. Susannah stood in it for exactly 3 seconds, looking at walls where her mother's paintings had hung and where now hung landscapes by someone with less sentiment and more money. Then she walked into the dining room. The room was arranged for 12. Crystal, silver, candles, all correct, all slightly different from how her father had done it. Conrad Sterling stood at the far end speaking with a man Susannah recognized as a member of Parliament for Midlothian. He was taller than she had imagined from the legal descriptions, broader through the shoulders. He had the look of a man who had spent years managing expectations, his own and everyone else's, and had arrived at something that could be mistaken for ease by anyone not paying close attention. Susannah was paying close attention. Beside him stood Lady Sabrina Holme in pale gold, with the composed certainty of a woman who had arranged this room and knew it. She turned when Ogilvy and Susannah entered. Her eyes moved to Susannah with the efficiency of a woman assessing something she had not accounted for in her calculations. Mr. Ogilvy. Lady Sabrina's welcome was warm and approximately 3 degrees below room temperature. And your guest? Miss Susannah Bryce, Ogilvy said. He said it the way he said most things, simply without ceremony, which had the precise effect of giving it the weight of ceremony. Something moved in the room, not dramatically. A small reorientation of attention, the kind that moved from person to person in quiet ripples. The older woman to Susannah's left went very still with the particular stillness of someone who had just recognized something and decided not to announce it. 2 guests near the window exchanged a glance they believed to be subtle. Susannah smiled at nothing in particular and accepted a glass of claret from the footman. Conrad Sterling had not looked at her yet. This was more interesting than if he had. The dinner lasted 2 hours. Susannah sat between a retired sheriff and a wool merchant from Leith, who spoke at considerable length about conditions in the lowland markets. She listened with the practiced attention of a woman who had spent years learning that genuine interest in other people's work was one of the cheapest forms of grace available to those without capital. She asked questions. She remembered what he told her. She was, by the end of the first course, well liked by the wool merchant, and she had not tried particularly hard. She was aware, through all of it, of Conrad Sterling at the head of the table. He managed the conversation with the easy authority of a man who had hosted these evenings many times, and 3 times in the course of the meal she felt his attention shift toward her end of the table in a way that had nothing casual about it. The 3rd time she caught him at it. He did not look away immediately. He held it for a moment, 2 seconds, perhaps 3, with the expression of a man trying to place something that sat just outside his reach. Then he turned back to the guest on his left. Lady Sabrina had noticed. Susannah could tell precisely because she gave no sign of it. After dinner, when the party moved to the drawing room, Ogilvy appeared quietly at Susannah's shoulder. "He's asked about you," he said, low enough for no one else. "I told him you were a family connection. He is trying to determine which family." "Let him determine," Susannah said. "He will." Ogilvy looked, she thought, distinctly satisfied. "Before the evening is out." She excused herself at 9:30 on the pretext of retrieving her shawl from the cloakroom. No one questioned it. She walked the corridor she had known since childhood, turned left at the 3rd door, and let herself into the east study. The room had changed, shelves rearranged, a new desk, unfamiliar chairs along the wall. But the escritoire was still there, her mother's, inlaid walnut with brass fittings, too fine to discard and too unfashionable to display prominently. It had been moved to the corner beneath the window. Susannah crossed to it. Her hands were steady. She had decided some time ago that she would not allow herself to feel anything in this room that she could not afford. The middle drawer. The document was there, still folded, still sealed with her father's crest. No one had known to look. She was standing with it in her hands when the door opened. Conrad Sterling said nothing for a moment. He looked at her, then at what was in her hands, then at the open drawer. That escritoire, he said finally, belonged to the previous Countess of Dunrath. Yes, Susannah said, she was my mother. The room went very quiet. From down the corridor came the faint sound of conversation, someone laughing. Lady Sabrina's laugh, she thought, the particular bright pitch of a woman performing ease for an audience. Conrad looked at her with the expression of a man revising a significant number of things simultaneously. "Miss Bryce," he said. Then, slower, "Susannah Bryce." He said the second version as though testing whether the pieces fit together the way he was now arranging them. "You applied for the companion position." "I did." "Your name was—" He stopped. "Crossed out," she said. Her voice was perfectly even. "Yes, I was aware." Something moved across his face. "You came here for that document." "I came here," she said, "because Mr. Ogilvy thought I should, and because this is the house I grew up in, and I found I wanted to stand in one of its rooms without pretending I had no claim to it." She looked at him steadily. The document was always going to be secondary. He looked at what she held. "What does it say?" "It establishes that my father intended this estate to be held in trust for me, not sold. The sale you purchased through was based on an incomplete accounting of his intentions." She paused. "I have a solicitor's copy already. This is the original." Conrad was quiet for a long moment. "Then you have grounds to contest." "I have grounds," she agreed. "Why haven't you?" He said it without the control he had clearly intended. Too direct, stripped of the careful management he wore in the dining room. Susannah looked at the document in her hands. She thought about 2 years of careful economies and the specific weight of what she had and had not done with what she held. She thought about her father's face at the kitchen table, the angle of the November light, the way he had said, "I need you to understand this, Susannah, in case I cannot manage it myself." "Because contesting it would have required me to become someone I didn't want to be," she said. A woman wielding a document against a man who bought a house in good faith is not the same as a woman with a legitimate grievance. The distinction mattered to me. She set the document on the escritoire. "Your solicitor was given incomplete information. That is not the same as your wrongdoing." Conrad looked at her for a long time. Something underneath his expression was moving. Not on the surface, but beneath it, the way things shifted in people who had been holding something at a distance and were only now, in a small room on a cold night, allowing it to come closer. "My steward crossed your name from that register," he said. It was not entirely clear which question he was asking. "He crossed it at someone's suggestion," Susannah said. She did not say whose. She did not need to. "I should have read the file." "Yes," she said, simply, without cruelty, because it was true and it cost her nothing to say it. "You should have." He looked at the document. He looked at her. Then, with the particular flatness of a man asking the question he actually meant, rather than the one he had prepared, "What do you want, Miss Bryce?" She considered it honestly. She had asked herself this question many times over the past 2 years, and the answers had shifted as the arithmetic of her situation shifted, and she had learned to be suspicious of answers that arrived too quickly. "I would like," she said, "to sit in my father's study without requiring someone else's permission to do so. The rest," she glanced at the folded pages, "I have not yet decided." He was quiet for long enough that she heard the wind come up against the east-facing window, which had always rattled when the weather came in from the Firth. The sound was exactly as she remembered it. Some things stayed the same, regardless of whose name was on the deed. "There are matters I should like to discuss properly," Conrad said at last, "with solicitors present, and a full accounting of what was and was not legally conveyed." "Yes," Susannah said. "And there are." He paused, with the careful precision of a man selecting words he had not prepared in advance. "Matters I should like to discuss that do not require a solicitor." She looked at him. He looked at her. "You could begin," she said quietly, "by not standing in the doorway of this room as though you are uncertain whether you are permitted to enter it." Something shifted in his face. Not quite relief, but near enough to it. The adjustment of a man given permission to be honest by someone who had every reason to withhold it. He moved to the chair by the window. He sat. Not the Duke arranging a room, not the host managing an occasion. A man sitting in a chair on a cold November night in a house that held more history than either of them had fully reckoned with. Susannah pulled the other chair from beside the escritoire. She sat. She did not reach for the document again. It could wait. It had waited 2 years. It was patient in the way of things that have nowhere else to be. Down the corridor, the dinner party continued its cheerful indifference. Lady Sabrina's voice carried through 2 closed doors, bright and carrying, and entirely unaware that the East Study had become, in the past quarter hour, a different room entirely. Conrad looked at his hands. He looked at the escritoire. He said quietly, "I owe you an accounting of several things." "You owe me an honest one," Susannah said. "That is all. They say the Duke of Ravenscroft lost his mind in the spring. He brought a contested claim before the courts himself. Not against himself precisely, but in the form of a petition to have the original sale reviewed, the trust instrument properly filed, the Dunrath estate disposition clarified in accordance with the late Earl's documented intentions. His own solicitors believed he had been poorly advised. His financial advisers believed he had been managed. Mr. Ogilvy, who had recommended the whole arrangement, observed the proceedings with the expression of a man who had placed a long patience and found it had not been misplaced. Lady Sabrina Holme departed Edinburgh for her family's estate in Perthshire before the thaw. She went with her dignity intact, and her opinion of Conrad Stirling expressed concisely in a letter his secretary was wise enough not to summarize for him verbatim. The courts took 3 months. The resolution was not simple, and no one pretended otherwise. Susannah Bryce did not regain the earldom that had passed correctly by succession, and she had never wanted it. What she regained was Dunrath Hall itself, or more precisely, a legal standing within it that could not be struck through. Conrad Stirling gained the standing alongside her. This had not been the original plan. It had become, over 3 months of honest conversation in a study with a rattling window, the only arrangement either of them found acceptable. At the first dinner they hosted together that autumn, 12 guests sat at the long table where Susannah's parents had once sat. The silver was restored to its original positions. One of her mother's landscapes had been retrieved from the storage room and rehung on the east wall, slightly crooked, which was exactly how her mother had always kept it. Parkins, who had managed Dunrath Hall across 14 years and 2 very different owners, set a new household register on the hall table the following morning. The first name entered, in a steady, unhurried hand, was Susannah Bryce, now Stirling, Duchess of Ravenscroft. No lines through it, no corrections. There was nothing left to correct.